This video is brought to you by Dr. Kristen R. Bromley's Guitar Method Book Series and Online Music Academy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Bromley. Welcome to my online academy. It's so great to have you joining me here in these online lessons. It's a Theory Thursday. I love music theory, don't you? Right now, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at some chord progressions and understanding sort of how those are created. We're building on what we did in the last lesson. So in the last lesson, we learned how various chords are created for a given key right from the major scale of that key. So I've got everything up here on the board for the key of C. We know that the C major scale in the key of C has the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. It's a little review from previous lessons on these Theory Thursdays. So those are the notes, and we know that we have a chord that can be created off each one of those steps. Off step 1, we have the C major chord for the key of C. Off step 2, we have D minor. Off step 3, we have E minor. Off step 4, we have F major. Off step 5, we have G major or G7. Off step 6, we have A minor. And then off step 7, we actually have B diminished. We don't end up playing that one very often, but it does exist. So our 1 chord is a C major chord, our 2 chord is a D minor chord, our 3 chord is an E minor chord, our 4 chord is an F major chord, our 5 chord is a G chord, or our 5-7. Those are really interchangeable, is G7. Our 6 chord is A minor, and our 7 chord is B diminished. Each one of these has a function within the key. They all have a different purpose in how they're relating to each other. Each one of these chords could exist. G7 technically doesn't, though it might be borrowed and used in another song that is in a different key, but each one of these could be played in another key. So when we put them together like this, they each function in a certain way, and we get chord progressions with tension and release. So our 1 chord is known as a tonic chord. It's the home chord of the key. It's the place we start with a lot of times, most of the time. We're going to go away from it, and then we want to come home. Isn't that what we want to do in life sometimes? We have this home, this place that's safe, this place that's just enjoyable to be at. We go out into the world or whatever. We have to run into various challenges throughout the day. We've got all this stuff. We build up this tension. We resolve it. We finally come home. Maybe we get to sleep, nice and peaceful sleep. At least we hope so. So the 1 chord is our home chord. It's our tonic chord. The 2 chord is known as a supertonic chord. The 3 chord is our mediant chord. The 4 chord is the subdominant chord. The 5 chord is the dominant chord. The 6 chord is the submediant. And then the diminished 7th there, that 7 that's on that, we call leading tone, a half step below the root. And if you need to understand that, you can look at that Theory Thursday lesson on intervals, is a leading tone 7th chord. Now, we get other chords sometimes. We're going to learn about those in future lessons, but these are the core chords in a given key without borrowing things from other keys, from the minor, and so on and so forth. So we have this here, and then I've got this up here on the board. Now let's look at some common chord progressions. I would say if you're worried about memorizing this, I have it here. It's great theory tidbit. It's good to understand some of this theory, but it doesn't matter so much, except that most of us need to keep in mind what the tonic is, or that 1 chord, and then the dominant chord. Those two have the most unifying specific relationships, because the 5 chord is actually what defines the key. So I mentioned earlier that the G7 or the 5-7 doesn't really technically exist in any other key. The 5-7, where we have the 1, the 3, the 5, and then a flatted 7th. I didn't just play a flatted 7th, I played the 1 again. The flatted 7th, that sound, that builds a specific tension. It's the dominant tension, you could say, the dominant chord that wants to resolve home. So as soon as we have that tension, it needs to resolve, and it begs to resolve. So it's the climax point, that dominant functioning sound, that dominant sound that needs to resolve back home. Now sometimes we don't resolve it back home, but that's where we ultimately want to go with it. So we have various chord progressions, and most of the time we start on the tonic or the one chord, and we can go away. Now, any one of these chords can go back to the tonic, but a lot of them actually proceed to certain chords better than others. And I just have a few examples up here on the board, and you could experiment with it. People have broken the rules of classical theory, classical music theory, over and over with pop songs and folk songs and blues and rock and so on. So we don't always have to obey the rules. Sometimes we find these new sounds by not obeying the rules. So I'm not going to throw out a whole bunch of rules for you, especially when we're not working on, say, 4-part harmonization or something that is done a lot with classical music theory training, but just understanding the chord progressions in general and how we're moving. So we can always start on the tonic. We most often at the climax point are going to come back via the dominant chords. So there's a lot of predominant options that go to the dominant and then bring us home. But classic things that we see in the songs that we play is to go from the 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 5 chord. Anytime I've written 5, it could also be 5/7. So they're kind of interchangeable there. 5 or 5/7 to the 1. I've just kept it simple instead of writing 5 or 5/7 in each of these places. Just know anywhere there's a 5 chord, it could also be a 5/7. That major chord with that flatted 7 kind of sound, resolving home. Okay, so 1, 4, 5, 1. I'm just going to play these using a down, down, up, down, up strumming pattern so we can hear them. So I have in C, I've got my 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 5 chord to the 1 chord. Pretty classic. I'll use the 5/7 this time. So I've got C to F, which is 4, to G7 to C. There's something known as a cadence, the cadential movement from that dominant chord to tonic chord. So classic, helps define the sound of that key. So that one we hear all the time at various harmonic spacings, so chords may last longer, but we get this sort of thing happening within songs, and sometimes even this is all that's happening for a song the entire time. We could have 1, 5, 4, 1. This actually kind of breaks classical theory rules, but we do this sort of thing a lot in blues type situations and things that are influenced by it. So I'd have 1, 5, 4, and 1. To get that sound sometimes, I'll put the 5/7 this time. So you got C to the G7 to F and back to C. I didn't put it up here because I was going for a little bit longer movement, but you can also just have 1 to the 5 to the 1 that happens. C to the G, back to C. Or C to G7. C, G7, back to C. So another thing that we sometimes run into is where we go 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. We kind of go back and forth. Many songs, millions of songs are written with just the 1, the 4, and the 5 chord. Those are such a primary sound to the music that we end up playing, especially in folk and pop and rock and so on. So we have 1, 2, ready. We'd have that 1 chord to that 4 chord, back to the 1 chord, to the 5 chord, to the 1 chord. Now I'll put the G7 in there instead. So you go red, D, and C, F, C, G7, back to C. Just like that. Okay, so we'll enter in some of the minor chords, but using just those 1, 4s, and 5s, lots and lots of songs are written just using those. So lots of things that you can find if you were to go through songs, figure out the key, which is oftentimes the chord you start on. Not always, but oftentimes, and almost always the chord you end on, though we can end deceptively, and oops, surprise, we didn't end on that tonic chord. So that can happen, but classic movements a little bit with these minor chords getting these in here. So this first one, 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. This is classic. So we go red D, and we got C to A minor to F to G to C. Many hits have been those chords. Now the G, I'll make it a G7 this time. So you got the 1, that's 6, 4, 5, 7, and 1. Having that dominant 7th chord just adds that little bit of extra tension that pulls back to that 1 chord. So we use that one a lot. I've thrown in here this movement from 3 to 6 to 2 to 5 to 1. This is another one that works. So I'm not starting on the 1 chord here, but you could. You absolutely could start on there just for space, and the 5 chords was kind of enough. This is a movement that we sometimes get. So you get 1, 2, we have the E minor, to the A minor, to the D minor, I'll do it again with the G7. So we go ready and E minor, to the A minor, to the D minor, to the G7, to the C. Sorry, I had a little bit of a hesitation there thinking of where I was going. Now I'm going to throw the C in front of it so you can hear the 1 to the 3 movement, which works just great. So you have 1, 2, ready, I've got C, to the E minor, to the A minor, minor, to the G, to the C. Or I'll put with the G7, 2, ready, starting with C, to E minor, to A minor, to D minor, to G7, and to C. Just like that. Now another one down here, and this is something that happens a lot in jazz, for example, and show tunes and those kinds of things, is a 2-5-1 movement. So we're going to go from that 1 chord to the 2, to the 5, to the 1. So go 1, 2, ready, you got the C, to D minor, to G, to C. Or G7, so you got ready and C, D minor, G7, and C. You can also just run into where it's that straight up 2, 5, and 1, just like that. So those are some examples. Some classic things when we go to the 6th chord is to follow it by either, you could go back to the 1, but you can also go to the 4 or the 2. Those are classic places to go. The 3 chord going back to the 1 works. The 3 chord going to the 6 chord works. The 5 chord going to the 1 is usually what happens, but once in a while we might go 5 down to 4, and actually we can do deceptive things like surprise instead of going home. So if I was going 1, 4, 5 surprise, I could go to the 6, for example. So C, now we expect to go back to C, but I surprise, I just went to A minor. That's sort of a deceptive thing to do. I could do surprise to the E minor. So go 1, 2, ready, to have the C, F, G, surprise to E minor. So that's a deceptive place to go, but it totally works. I could go back to the 4 chords. So you go 1, 2, ready, got the C, go somewhere from there and keep things going. So sometimes we think, oh, I've hit that 5 chord and I'm coming home. Nope, just surprise. Here's a little deceptive movement. I'm going to go somewhere else. So lots of options. We almost always start on the tonic or the 1 chord and end on there. And if we're not going to start on it, we usually do end there. If we don't start on it, we're going to get to it at some point because we need to hear a cadential movement to help us know, oh, we're in the key of C. So at some point, we're going to get that 5 to 1 movement if we don't start out on that 1 chord. When we work through, we build tension, go different places. The chords can, of course, last a different amount of time. I was just doing it with each one lasting for a bar, but these are some classic movements and the things that we see inside of the music that we're playing, which is just absolutely fun and awesome. Now, these aren't the only chords that are examples that we use. And I didn't really throw in the diminished. I could have thrown the diminished up there. It's going to pull back to the 1 chord as well. But it's sort of an interesting sound. We don't end up using it very often, but you do get it. So if I went 1, 4, and then I'm going to go for that little diminished, and back to 1. It's a sound that could be thrown in there as well, but we don't run into it very often, so I didn't put it in sort of the classic movement places here. But this would really help with songwriting or just understanding the music that we're playing better, opening our ears when we're trying to figure out what somebody's doing inside a song. A lot of times, if we can't quite tell, we can play through some of the different theoretical examples that we know would be possible. Of course, this is just the key of C. This will transfer to any of the other keys. If you need help with what notes are in the other keys, then just check out those lessons on Theory Thursdays. The Theory Thursday playlist lessons that have gone through the major keys, the major scales, just getting inside of those so that you could figure out any of these for any of the 12 keys. So the next thing we're going to do next Thursday is to actually look at the minor scale and the types of chords that come out of it, because what becomes really fun is, first of all, sometimes we will play songs in a minor key. We do that, and that's fun, and there's chords that correlate in that key, the same way we've got ones that work in the major key. But also, a lot of times in major especially, we will borrow from the minor key that we're going to learn about and bring those chords in, which gives us more options that work really great. We also can do secondary types of things that we borrow, and we'll talk about that as we go through this as well. But right now in this Theory Thursday, we want to get a little bit of an understanding of how chord progressions work. So as we move forward and we start working on different types of chords, we can see how to sort of situate those inside of key and how they're useful. We've gone over modes in the last couple lessons, and these apply to modes, but we want to get into stepwise motion in modes and learn how to play modes on the guitar in case you're wanting to improvise or do those types of things. So lots of great things to come, and of course there's lessons on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays that are pertain to jazz guitar right now. We got Technique Tuesdays and various things that happen on Saturdays. Lots of lessons already on the channel, lots of great help for helping you with playing the guitar. Keep at it, have fun, take care, and we'll see you again.
If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. For more in-depth lessons and to progress through a free guitar course, check out my Guitar 101 series on YouTube and my guitar method books, which all come with access to hours of in-depth video lessons. You can find more information about me and my products at KristenBromley.com. Take care.